Hi, my name is Michael Halvorson from Pacific Lutheran University, and this lesson is designed to introduce the Spanish Armada, a turning point in English history from the year 1588. And I wanted to introduce this with some of the excitement that history students sometimes encounter when they do investigate things like, no, not Pirates of the Caribbean, not Muppet Treasure Island. Who reorganized these slides? Yes, there we go. I'm trying to bring some of the artifacts from the past forward so that we can investigate this turning point in the history of England as it makes its way to Britain and the modern United Kingdom. This happens during the later Tudor period, during the reign of Queen Elizabeth, and it involves a plan by the Spanish to invade England and to tip the scales from Protestantism back to Roman Catholicism. And a way of looking at the beginning of this episode in English history is really to recall that during the early Tudor years, the plan was that Catherine of Aragon would come from a unified Spain and marry an English prince. At first this was Prince Arthur, and later it became Prince Henry. And with that relationship and marriage, they would unify these two dynasties, the powerful unified Spanish kingdom, which had been brought together by Ferdinand and Isabella, and the English kingdom, which was currently being run by Henry VII, the new Tudor king. And there was a lot of anticipation that this Spanish princess would help unify the countries, and that there was a lot of goodwill towards Spain at that time. This is before the Protestant Reformation got started, and so Europe was in traditional Roman Catholicism, and the thought was that Spain and England might be a nice match, in particular to offset the power of France in Western Europe. After the death of Catherine of Aragon, her daughter eventually succeeded the throne of England. This is Mary I, the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. And when she took over the throne of England in 1553, one of the things that she wanted to continue was this relationship with Spain. And so in 1554, she was married to Philip II, who was king of Spain at that time. And because Italy was rather divided and weak, Spain was really the major defender of Roman Catholicism in Europe. And Spain was also on the move because it had unified, and then through New World discoveries and colonization and some pretty brutal behavior, they enriched themselves, particularly from gold and silver that were found in Mexico and Peru. And so the Spanish were very powerful, and as Europe took up sides during the Protestant Reformation, it was the Spanish who defended Roman Catholicism most dramatically. So how would England continue to manage this situation? Would England become Catholic also, or would they remain Protestant? Well, unfortunately, Mary I died, and her effort to restore Catholicism was not wholly successful. And in 1558, her half-sister Elizabeth I came to the throne. This is an image of her coronation at Westminster Abbey in 1558. Her long red hair, which she got from her father, flowing outside of her crown there and onto her shoulders. And you can see how young she was. She had a very successful reign, though, and ruled from 1558 all the way up to 1603. So when she consolidated her power, one of the people that she used to support her was Lord Burleigh, her first major advisor, and here's an image of him from the National Portrait Gallery in London. And she was also supported strongly by Sir Francis Drake, who in the 1580s became a very capable sea captain, sometime pirate. He was a naval officer in the English Navy and also an explorer for England throughout the later years of Elizabeth's rule. In fact, as Spain became a major rival, it was Sir Francis Drake who captured Spanish ships and set them ablaze. In 1587, Francis Drake went down to southern Spain in Cadiz and entered the harbor and was able to destroy numerous ships that were there, over 24 enemy vessels that were there. The English boarded and burned, and he did this in the Caribbean. He also circumnavigated the globe between 1577 and 1580, so he's a very capable sea captain that supported Elizabeth very strongly. On the other side of the equation, Elizabeth had some rivals, and one was her cousin, who was Mary, Queen of Scots. Here's an image of her from the National Portrait Gallery. Mary was a ruler over Scotland from 1542 to 1567, and she was raised Roman Catholic and had very strong connections to France at the time. And so for that reason, this relative of Elizabeth was really opposed to her in many respects, because Scotland and France had often intrigued against England, and Mary, Queen of Scots, was part of that. Later in the 1580s, Mary began to plot with some foreign agents about actually killing her cousin Elizabeth I and taking over the English throne, which she would use then to restore Roman Catholicism. So the plot was discovered, and in 1586 and 1587, Elizabeth's counselors sort of took over and actually beheaded Mary, Queen of Scots. Elizabeth acted and behaved like she was very upset. She put some of the people in the Tower of London that had participated in this beheading, but it was partially in her interest as well. So this was a plan that the Spanish were supporting. They thought that if they could put Mary, Queen of Scots on the throne in England, then that would turn England back to a Roman Catholic country, and that clearly failed. Philip II of Spain had, of course, been married to Mary I of England, but after she died, he returned home. He continued to develop his control over Spain and neighboring lands. He also got remarried and went about building a dynasty, and Philip II lived a long time, all the way to 1598. So not only was Spain powerful, it also developed these New World territories, and it had control over parts of the Netherlands, parts of Italy, and after 1580, the Spanish dominated and controlled Portugal. And so from this base, Philip II thought to extend the power of his domains in Roman Catholicism by attacking England. And so in 1587 and 1588, he put together an armada of ships, a vast armada of ships that would be able to attack and sail against the English. And so this armada left Spain and left Portugal in May. And here's a map that shows what this looked like. If you can see my little mouse down here, down by Portugal, they left Lisbon and then sailed up through the Bay of Biscay. They left in May, and by June had made their way into the English Channel. And their strategy was to come along through the English Channel to Calais, at which point they would support a invasion fleet of basically barges and other small ships that would take troops from the Calais area across into England, and then they would march on London. All right, so they weren't really just out there to dominate the seas with their ships, but they wanted to kind of bring an invasion force into London. Now, the difficulty with this was communication, because the ships sailed in May, and by June and July they had made their way into the English Channel, but it was very difficult to coordinate their efforts. There was no easy way to communicate. If you think about this as the late 1500s, there was no telephone, obviously, no internet, no real way of communicating. Eventually, the telegraph would be a mechanism that would allow people on land to send electronic pulses. That would not be until the 1830s. In the late 1700s, some Europeans had developed collection of semaphore towers that allowed people to send visual signals that people could see from towers and quickly, through a chain of towers, communicate. It's something that they were able to use during the French Revolution, for example. But at this time period, there was no easy way to coordinate their large-scale activities like this. And so when the Armada made its way into the Channel, made its way into Calais, they were not able to coordinate with the people that were there on the ground to invade. And the invading commander, his name was Alexander Farnese. He was the Duke of Parma, and he was waiting in the Netherlands for this information, but it never quite came. So Alonso Perez de Guzman, who was the Spanish naval commander, ordered his ships to drop anchor in the unprotected harbor at Calais, and this was on July 28th, 1588. And his crews were just waiting there, and they were surprised by the English, who in the cover of darkness sent several of their lesser ships on fire, and they drifted through the Spanish lines, and these fire ships got close to the Spanish ships and lit them on fire. And then many of the other English vessels came in and started to shoot their cannons at the Spanish, and it set off some of the gunpowder that was on the ships, and this picture is kind of a representation of what some of that looked like. So this strategy of setting some of your ships on fire and then drifting them or navigating them up close to other boats had been around really since ancient times, but in this era, some of the ships, like the Spanish ships, were particularly vulnerable to this because their sails could catch on fire easily. The ships were all made out of wood. The Spanish had many of these large galleons, and they were entirely made out of wood. And so what they would do is send people in these fire ships and then kind of abandon those ships at the last moment. And they actually had in the English Navy some of these fire ships that were designed to be set on fire. They might not be used for 5, 6, 7 years or something like that, but they had them in the Navy really up until the time of Napoleon, so the late 1700s. But it was an effective strategy that was used at this time. Also, the Sir Francis Drake began to pound the group with cannon shot, and so the Spanish had to cut their anchors and just start to go out and just sail away, and they were chased up along the coast of England throughout July. They went up and around Scotland. We've got the map back here again. They went up around Scotland through the Orkney Islands and came back down along Ireland. And then they had another problem. They were disrupted by severe storms. And those storms, called, the English winds, basically supporting the English, they really damaged a lot of the ships. So something like 5,000 Spanish sailors were either shipwrecked or crashed aground in Ireland, or had some sort of problem like that. And the word was out that they were coming out and around, and no one was allowed to support them. So the Irish and the English that were there along the coast were told to just immediately kill anyone that came aground. And so if they survived the shipwreck, and the Spanish sailors were killed there in Ireland. Occasionally there's stories of one or two of them escaping and making their way. And so they made their way back down to Spain and called it quits. A few of the guns have been found off the coastline, and they had this sort of look to them. And so the Armada was disastrously stopped. And the English commemorated it. They said God blew, and the Spanish, were scattered. They did many paintings, coins, celebrations, plays were written that commemorated this great event. And the consequence of this in Elizabeth's later years, basically, was that of the 30,000 Spanish soldiers that departed from Spain, only 10,000 of those survived. Elizabeth remained in control of England until her death in 1603, so never again would she be so intensely challenged. England joined Spain as a dominant naval power out on the seas, expanding its overseas trade and colonies, and Europe was forced to accept both Protestant and Roman Catholic beliefs. So this really launched and boosted the Elizabethan age. one that supported building projects, science, drama, and the arts.